Today I'm going to talk to you guys about my antidepressant withdrawal story. You might have also heard this called protracted withdrawal syndrome. Before I get into how getting off of an antidepressant completely wrecked my health and led me into chronic illness, I want to share with you guys first why I got on the antidepressant. In 2007, I was in nursing school, and for the first time in my life, I was exposed to suffering, death, and dying, on top of heavy workload, not eating well, not getting enough sleep. And I became very apathetic. I wouldn't say that I was depressed. I certainly was not diagnosed with any type of mental health illness, anxiety, major depression, or anything like that. But I was just very apathetic, and I was also really struggling in school. But the pressures and the stress of nursing school really led me to look for a solution to get me out of this funk and to get me through nursing school. Because I had worked so hard to get in, I didn't want this apathy and this just kind of tiredness and even a little bit of sadness keep me from finishing nursing school. So in 2007, I saw a doctor and I got put on Celexa, and that is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Within the first week of taking Celexa, I noticed that I had a little bit more motivation. I wouldn't say that there was anything really else that I noticed with taking it. 11 years go by, and I kind of was in a season of life where I was just really searching, okay, what's holding me back in my life? Why am I making decisions that I'm making? And I really took a look at, Celexa. I've been on this medication for 10 plus years. I don't really think I need it. I don't really feel depressed, or I don't feel that I have anxiety, and I certainly did not have any type of depression or anything at the time I got on it. And just to note how easy it was to go that long of being on this medication without having anybody educate me on how to use them short term, and it just kind of got away from me. It just became something that I did. Part of my nighttime routine was I just took the Celexa. Before I move on to withdrawal syndrome, I want to make it clear that I never really had adverse reactions from being on Celexa. I know there's a lot of side effects, people have trouble with them when they're on them. I never did. In 2016, after having been on it all that time, I decided that it was time to get off of it. I just wasn't really needing it anymore. And as a nurse, based on my own education and knowledge of antidepressants, is that you cannot become dependent on them. You cannot become addicted to them. So just taper off of them slow. You just don't want to taper off of them too fast. So I was on 20 milligrams of Celexa when I attempted to withdraw from it in 2016. I cut the dose by a quarter every week for 4 weeks and then was completely off of it. I had no issues while tapering, but it wasn't until the week after my last dose that I began to have tremendous anxiety and panic, just not being able to really cope at work with the stress. And then also just this really strange feeling of impending doom, like something bad was going to happen. And my body internally was responding as if something really bad was about to happen. So anxiety for no reason. Really looking back, it was the fight or flight response that was being activated over and over and over again. And so I thought, oh my goodness, this must be because of antidepressant withdrawal. And so I got back on Celexa. And with that, which it's called Reinstatement in the antidepressant withdrawal world, once I reinstated Celexa, my symptoms went away. So I reinstated and started to feel somewhat a sense of normalcy again, but was really concerned about what had just happened. And so I did a little bit of research and realized, okay, I need to go slower. And at this point, I had seen doctors. Nobody really understood antidepressant withdrawal. When people have withdrawal syndrome, it's looked at as if, this is who you are. You have to be on these drugs, so let's add more. And that's how people get into this kind of vicious cycle of polypharmacy, especially with psychotropics, is they go through a withdrawal experience and then are told, okay, now you need this mood stabilizer, now you need this one. Really, what happened was a destabilization of the central nervous system and all the downstream effects that causes. So in the fall of 2017, I attempted again, but because I knew that getting off of it over 1 month was way too fast, I decided I would get off of it over 4 months. And again, this is based on just the little bit of research that I had done and not being able to find a practitioner that could understand what I was going through. So there was a lot of gaslighting and a lot of, dismissing when I would talk to practitioners, like, this is what's happening. And so I had to take matters into my own hands. So in the fall of 2017, I tapered off of Celexa a quarter of the dose over every month. So for 4 months, I went down every single month, a quarter of the dose. Was really great throughout the taper process, didn't have any symptoms. And at the very end, I was like, okay, I think I did it the right way. I am so glad to have Celexa out of my life. I'm so glad I did it slow enough to where I don't have those withdrawal symptoms that I had that last time. Well, unfortunately, a week after my last dose, I ended up having extreme withdrawal syndrome. And I'm going to read to you some of these symptoms that I had, because it's important for people to understand that withdrawal syndrome, what happens in the brain, so you have in your brain, it's called the limbic system. That's the part of the brain that controls your fight or flight response. It works to keep you safe and keep you out of danger. And what happens is when you have antidepressant withdrawal and you abruptly remove the selective serotonin reuptake inhibition, the nervous system becomes destabilized and you have what's called limbic kindling. And basically it's just either a huge attack on the limbic system or repeated subthreshold attacks on the limbic system that over time, or if the attack is big enough, which is what happened in the case with me, the limbic system now becomes damaged. And these were some of the symptoms. And this might be hard for me to read because this was the hardest time of my life. Dizziness, weakness, insomnia, impending doom, chest pain, brain fog, worsening menstrual cycle, rash, headaches, inability to keep my legs still, which is akathisia, weight gain, feeling faint, hypoglycemia, tachycardia, nightmares, left upper quadrant pain. I had numerous respiratory infections that just wouldn't heal, multiple ER visits for chest pain and heart palpitations, atrial arrhythmias, increased urinary frequency, heartburn, nocturnal panic attacks, which is where you're asleep but you wake up having a panic attack. It's the worst thing in the world. Depersonalization, feeling like a shell of myself, tingling in my extremities, cold intolerance, jolt feelings in my chest, to just name a few. Those things happened in a short amount of time. At first, it was more of the emotional symptoms, the panic, the impending doom, but over time, it became more of a chronic illness by nature, because once the body is in that fight or flight response and the limbic system has been kindled, it's very similar to a traumatic brain injury. And so when the brain and the nervous system isn't working properly, now you have downstream effects. And so that led to chronic fatigue syndrome, perimenopause. I basically shut down being able to make any hormones, which actually led to an infertility diagnosis. One of the worst symptoms that I had was the heart arrhythmias, the scariest. Had several bouts of atrial tachycardia that led me to see multiple cardiologists and electrophysiologists that wanted to do cardiac ablations and put me on heart medications. And it was absolutely a nightmare. There's a lot of memories that I have looking back on my wedding of just not being able to remember, because memory issues, that's another thing I didn't bring up. I remember my best friend and I were shopping for flower girl dresses, and her daughter was one of my flower girls, and we were shopping and she was trying them on and I couldn't remember her name. I couldn't remember my flower girl's name. And that was another one of those really low points, because the cognitive function at the time was so diminished because of the shock that antidepressant withdrawal was on my nervous system. It was a very scary time, because through all of those symptoms and being a nurse and having the knowledge that I do have, I didn't feel like there was anybody that could understand what that was like. Because the thing that you do is you just call the person crazy, right? Like, you need more meds. And that was told to me. I had to know early on that there wasn't going to be much of a support, and then I wasn't going to have a whole lot of credibility, because unfortunately in polypharmacy and psychiatry, a lot of people don't have a voice, because you're crazy, right? So all of that started in 2017, and at this time my husband had proposed. My fiance at the time, or my boyfriend at the time, proposed to me. So I became engaged. And then I also, my husband was running for office. And so we also had a campaign. And it was such a hard and isolating time for me in my life because I couldn't show up for my life how I wanted to. I would have extreme bouts of fatigue. I would be bedridden for several days. So at that time in my life, I had so many things going on, and to be dealing with this on top of that was really hard. So with dealing with all of these symptoms, I could not work. I made the decision to leave the ER and become a nurse professor. I thought, okay, because at the time now, chronic fatigue has been setting in around mid-2018. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna do teaching. That's something I can handle because it's not as much energy as working in the ER. I was an ER nurse, by the way. And so I started teaching nursing, and even that was too much. There were multiple instances of me having to lay down in my office. There were times I was having heart arrhythmias while I was teaching students. I actually had an episode of a heart arrhythmia and had to, on my way to clinical to be there for my students, and had to cancel. So it was getting really, really hard. So we had to make the decision that I wouldn't work at all. Around that time, I made the decision to go ahead and reinstate Celexa to get out of some of these symptoms. However, the longer you go off of the med, the harder it is to reinstate. And I think it's recommended that you don't reinstate anytime after a month. Well, I had waited about 3 months after getting off of Celexa to reinstate because I kept thinking, this will pass, I'm gonna get through this, I don't wanna get back on it. But it just got to the point to where, I really was like needing to live my life. I was getting married, I wanted to be happy, I genuinely love life. That's what my friends and family tell me, like, I love life. So this was really just sucking the life out of me and making me feel like I wasn't really living my life. So I tried to reinstate, and that was one of the best things that I could have done. I reinstated about 3 months after my taper, which is not usually recommended. So if that is something that you're wanting to do, please know that it's a risk. For me, however, it did work out. It took away a lot of the withdrawal symptoms, but it did not help. By this point in time, my body was sick. My thyroid was shot. My heart arrhythmias were still happening. Turns out I was really anemic. And so these are some of those downstream secondary effects of having a destabilized nervous system. And so I reinstated on Celexa and started to feel better. And I went up to 15 milligrams. There are some physicians and practitioners out there that do understand SSRI withdrawal and can see it for what it is. Unfortunately, in my experience, I was never able to find a practitioner that could help me identify what it was and how to move forward. So I ended up finding a wonderful resource online called survivingantidepressants.org, and I will have that linked in the comments for you. And this is where I read forum after forum after forum of people just like me who could not get off of their antidepressants. And so I took that information with me and decided, okay, I'm going to try again. And I am now at 7.5 milligrams. So over the last 2 years, I've slowly been going down on my Celexa, very, very slowly. So as of now, I'm still on it. I have to literally take a nail file and shave down my dose ever so often. And I won't really explain kind of how I'm doing that here. I'll probably do other videos and share how that process is going. If you're trying to figure out how to get off of your antidepressant and you don't have support, survivingantidepressants.org really is a wealth of knowledge. And I wouldn't have been able to fully understand what was going on with me because, again, doctors don't really have eyes to see what it is. That's where I learned about slow tapering. It's recommended that you don't ever really taper any less than 10% of the dose that you're currently at. And so for some people, it's years. And that's going to be me. And I'm okay with that. The question that you might ask is, well, I know so-and-so or myself got off of an antidepressant and did fine. And you are absolutely right. There are many people that come off of antidepressants and do fine. And through my journey of trying to figure out what happened to me, I learned that people metabolize pharmacological substances very different genetically. You have in your liver or your detoxification system what's called the cytochrome P450 enzymatic process. And basically what this does is it breaks down and metabolizes drugs. Well, for some people, they're really fast metabolizers, and other people are really slow metabolizers. And so without knowing how you metabolize drugs, it's important to realize that when you choose to take an antidepressant, in this case, it's a risk because you don't know how you're going to metabolize the drug. The GeneSight is a saliva test that you do that tests the pharmacokinetics in your body. So basically you get a report that says, here are the drugs you should avoid, here are the drugs that would work for you. And turns out that Celexa was on a list of me being what's called a rapid metabolizer, and I should have never been on that drug in the first place. It's been about 3 years. I've been able to really work to heal my body. One thing that has been absolutely crucial to healing from antidepressant withdrawal is working through neuroplasticity exercises. I do a program called Dynamic Neural Retraining System, and I'll have that linked below for you as well. And it is a self-paced neuroplasticity exercise program that teaches you how to rewire your brain. Because when you go through the damage of limbic kindling and traumatic brain injury from protracted withdrawal syndrome or SSRI withdrawal syndrome, you have to learn to heal the nervous system, and you have to learn to create neuroplastic changes in your favor. So what is neuroplasticity? Well, a long time ago, scientists used to think that the brain was hardwired. But now we know that it's plastic, and we have the ability to actually change our brain pathways. And in doing that, we're giving our brain and our subconscious a new story. And we're getting out of that fight or flight and creating pathways that lead to healing and health. And so that has been just paramount. And another thing that has been really helpful for me has been nutrition. And that is why I'm now a nutritionist and help people with chronic illness, many of which who are chronically ill due to antidepressant withdrawal. Another thing that was really helpful was I got on bioidentical hormones to help, because the shock to my system depleted me of hormones and basically sent me into menopause. Because you have to understand that when the body is stressed or there's trauma, the endocrine system is going to favor stress hormone production like cortisol and adrenaline over reproductive hormones. So you're going to have higher stress hormones, and your progesterone and estrogen and your endocrine hormones are going to go down lower. And so that's why there's infertility and hormonal issues, and that's something that I've struggled with quite a bit. So those are just some of the things. And I also work really hard to stay away from things that stress out the nervous system, whether that's the news or scary movies, toxic relationships. I really try hard to stay away from those things that stress out the nervous system. And if you have gone through antidepressant withdrawal, you probably know a little bit about what I'm talking about. And I just work really hard to be grateful every single day that I am not where I was. And if you're watching this and you're in the throes of antidepressant withdrawal, just know that my heart is there for you. It goes out to you. It is close to you, and that you're not alone, and that what you're going through is very real. You're not crazy. Your brain's not broken, and people do heal from this. Check out survivingantidepressants.org or the Inner Compass Initiative. Those are two great resources. I also like Dr. Kelly Brogan's book, A Mind of Your Own. I like the Breggin Hour podcast by Dr. Peter Breggin. He is a psychiatrist that's at the head of all of the antidepressant withdrawal awareness. Dr. Glenmullen, his books are really good. I'll also link below some other doctors that are working really hard to get to the bottom of and bring awareness about antidepressant withdrawal. I have a passion to get my story out now, because this was a very profound, traumatic, life-altering thing that I went through. And for so long, I didn't want to share about it in the way that I have today. I didn't want to be vulnerable because pride, right? It completely changed everything about my life. There are a lot of things that I missed out on, but at the same time, I'm extremely grateful that I went through this, because it showed me the truth in a way that I didn't see it before. And I now have eyes to see and knowledge to help other people. And if I continue to stay silent, well, that's just not an option for me. Antidepressant withdrawal is very real, and the damage that it does to the brain also creates quite a bit of damage and imbalance in the body and can lead to years and years of illness. It's a time that there is more awareness put out there. It's time that doctors start understanding that when their patients come to them and say, everything changed when I got off of this antidepressant, that they believe them and understand. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. Thank you for opening your mind to better understand something that perhaps maybe you've never heard about. And if you found this video because you are going through antidepressant withdrawal, you're on the right track. Keep moving forward. It does get better.